Hello and welcome to the Doof Book Club, our monthly live stream discussion of a book chosen by you, our listeners. My name is Matt Freeman, and down here in my footnotes you can find Scott Daly.
You did beautifully, Matt. Well done. I that was hard for you. I understand, but you did great. You owned it. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Oh my gosh, this is a incredibly delayed and late book club episode. We had so many technical details. If you're listening to this after the fact, you folks just have no idea how rough this was for our live listeners here. But we did it. We're here. And we're ready to go. So we hope you're all having a wonderful Friday evening. I'm sure we know a lot of the folks. I actually see some new names in our chat here, which is great. So if you are here, for the very, very first time, this is a terrible example of how this thing goes, but welcome. We are Doof Media, and we make podcasts all about the stories we love. We also arrange and organize and attempt to manage this monthly book club. Matt, explain the thing.
Each month, Scott and I select 5 books from a pool submitted to us by our wonderful Doof community. We put up a poll for all of our supporters on Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia, and we let them vote on which they'd like us to talk about. The book with the most votes wins, and then we all read it.
And then we meet here on the last Friday of the month and spend an hour or so chatting about the book. Before we get into this month's book, though, we do have a bit of homework. As Matt mentioned, we have a poll for our patrons, but we also have a poll for our live listeners. So if you are here attending live, especially if you have waited the extra 20 minutes to attend the show live, there's a poll that I have linked in the chat right now, which will give you our books for next month. You get to vote for 2 of them. And those votes will be added to our patron votes to get the final count for what we'll be covering. I'm going to tell you right now, the vote is really close. It's really, really, really close. There was a 3-way tie, and then at the last minute, it was turned into a 2-way tie. So your votes here tonight will definitely influence what book we're covering next month. So that vote will be open until the very end of the show. We will close it once we're done, and then we'll figure out what we're going to talk about next month. But let's not waste any more time, and let's talk about this month. So this is one of the 2 times a year, actually, that Matt and I don't allow you folks at home the ability to vote on the books. We call it's the We Pick 'em, and this was my month, so I actually selected this month's book. And Matt, what was the book that I so expertly and wonderfully selected?
This month, the book that was chosen was House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski, and the summary is as follows. A young family moves into a small home on Ash Tree Lane where they discover something is terribly wrong. Their house is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. Of course, neither Pulitzer Prize-winning photojournalist Will Navidson nor his companion Karen Green was prepared to face the consequences of that impossibility until the day their 2 children wandered off and their voices eerily began to return another story of creature darkness, of an ever-growing abyss behind a closet door, and of that unholy growl which soon enough would tear through their walls and consume all their dreams.
What the fuck is that summary? That's definitely not what this book is about at all.
That's maybe the worst summary of any book ever.
Yeah. That's one layer deep into this multi-layered onion of a book. Yeah, so House of Leaves. So for those folks you at home, kind of the way this works is as I will ask Matt what his overall impressions of the book before we really get into the details. And while Matt is answering, that's why when I want you folks at home to let me know, had you read this book before, or did you read it for the book club, or are you just a fan of it? And what do you think of the book? And Matt, how about you? I know this was, I guess, technically the first time you had read it. I think you had started it on your own and just not finished it. So what did you think of House of Leaves?
Yeah, I had started it on my own. I'd gotten an eighth into it and just kind of ground down by just the difficulty of it. And I'm glad that you forced me to finish. It's one of those books that was very sort of all-consuming while I was reading it. There's tons of conversations to be had about it. Like I kept sort of pivoting and changing my mind regarding what level I wanted to talk about and approach this book on. It's funny. Agrimorphy in the chat says we need to schedule another podcast to fully dive into the book. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, you could almost do like 3 whole podcasts about this book, where each podcast you just talk about like a different sort of angle on things, and like what
Yeah.
we're doing. Like you could talk about it as a narrative, and you could talk about it as a like metatextual weird artifact, and uh, then you start getting out into the questions of like what's really going on, or what is the author trying to say with this. Um, and I feel like none of the tools that we've developed over 6 million previous book clubs have really quite prepared me for this moment. But nonetheless, I'm ready for the challenge. Um, what did you think about the book, Scott?
Yeah. I love this book a lot. It's really interesting one. This is candidly a book that I had read on my own already before the book club. I read it. I picked it this month specifically because I wanted to talk about it with you, and I knew that if I picked it for book club, it would force you to finish it. I knew you were struggling with it, and I know our deadlines kind of force us to finish things sometimes, which is an interesting way to approach this book because the first time I read it, it was purely for pleasure, just for fun, and I took it. I took a while. It was a book that I had to come back to multiple times, but I got to read it leisurely. This is, I had a set amount of time. I had to focus on it, and I felt like I had to read every word, which is a thing I didn't do the first time around. I approached this book very casually the first time around, which is like if I like I'm not going to read that footnote and not the Johnny Truant stuff. Obviously I read all that, but some of the ramblings of the footnotes I was like, I'm just going to skip this. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to read every line in the appendix. I'm not going to read all those little poems. I'm just going to skip those. Don't need to do that. And this time around, because I knew I was going to be talking about it, I had to, or at least I felt that I had to really spend the time on that stuff and read every possible word I could, which made me like the book a little less actually. Um, but it is just, it's fascinating. It's like, do I like this book or do I like the idea of this book? Is one of the big questions that I have, like for myself, and I think for all of us, is like this is a fascinating kind of journey through what a novel can be, um, while at the same time almost boring by design in places. And I just don't know how I feel about a lot of that.
Yeah, as Jessica says in the chat, it's an experience.
Hmm.
It
Hmm.
is a novel. There's a novel in there. There's at least two novels in there,
Yeah.
actually. But on top of that, it's just playing with the format to the extent where it's almost like he's trying to break the format. He's trying to be like, "What can I get away with this? Will they
Yeah.
tolerate this?" um, and he does so many different clever things that I literally don't remember all of them. Right? Like I could just see her hit and just list like, okay, they're, the hallway is getting progressively narrower, and so the width and height of the text on the page is narrowing,
So
and
fun.
to give you this sense of claustrophobia. And then there's like a whole section about like mazes, and I don't even remember exactly what it's about, but it's like stuff is like sideways and backwards and like stacked. You have to like flip the page over to see what's on the other side to like continue. And some of that stuff I did just skip. I think my reading experience was more like your first reading experience, where
Hmm.
I definitely did not read all of the like footnotes where it was just like a, a made up citation for a thing. I was like, yeah, I'm sure it's clever, but
Yeah.
but for me, just as an aside, for me, like the reason I don't like to read the footnotes is more that it just totally breaks my train of thought and makes it very difficult for me to process
Yeah.
um, the text. Which I've heard David Foster Wallace say that he does that on purpose so that you'll slow down.
Hmm.
But for me, I'm like, no, that'll just give me a headache. I don't want to do that. So I usually didn't. I thought about pretending to say that I skipped all the footnotes, including the Johnny Truant ones, but of course that's not true. Um,
Yeah. 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 I mean, I think most of that is just in there for like, garbage. Like especially the labyrinth part you're talking about. Like half those footnotes are just like long lists of architects and
mhm.
like lists of architectural features in most houses, and it's just like, and halfway through reading that, I was just like, I don't need to read the rest of this. And that's one of the things that I think is really fascinating about this book. And one of the things I wanted to talk to y'all about is I've kind of had this expression that I've said for a few years now, which is that in general, books teach you how to read them. And that, like, through the text that you're reading, it's kind of instructing you on what you're supposed to do and what you're supposed to be paying attention to, and they just kind of usher you into the story. And this is a book that does not do that at all. It does not tell you how to read it ever. Um, because it's throwing all these footnotes at you, and like, I think there is a person that could read this book and just not read those footnotes ever. I mean, like, I think when you get to the extended multi-page Johnny Truant ones, like, you would probably be like, this is weird, but it's a footnote and I don't care about footnotes, so I'll read that stuff later. um you could do that. You could, like, there's multiple moments where the book says, references something in the appendix, and like one example is Johnny's letters from his mom, which go on for about 50 pages in the appendix. 50 pages of letters. And you could read them at the first point where the book in a footnote tells you about their existence. That's what I did. Or you could, wait and read the book all the way through and then read them at the end, which is, I believe, what you did, right, Matt?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I feel like that actually causes two fairly different reading experiences.
mhm. Yeah, and all this is, as Tyler in chat is saying, all this is the point, right? This is
Mhm.
it is a book that is meant to take you on a journey and lose yourself on that journey, because you read a 5-page Johnny Truant footnote, and then you turn back to the book proper, and the first thing is like, what are we talking about? Wait,
Yeah,
where were we? Have they gone in the hallway yet? Like, and you have to catch up and you remind yourself and refresh yourself, and it allows you to get lost. It allows you to feel confused. It's this really fascinating and successful, I think, attempt to just fuck with you constantly.
yeah. I mean, I kept wondering if, Johnny Truant was going to end up in the labyrinth, or if the Nevidsons were going to end up in Johnny Truant's world, and but it didn't quite go that direction. But I was
Yeah,
like, how is this all going to fit together? And the answer is like, it's
doesn't.
exactly what it appears to be. It's
Yeah,
not. It's
yeah.
it's, it's not doing that. Yeah, we got a lot of reactions in the chat. Bipolaron says they've owned the book for years, found it difficult to get into, but kept it around as a neat artifact and didn't finish it until today. Yeah, I only finished it earlier this week, so it still took me some time to get through, but I'm glad I did.
Yeah, I mean, we announced this early, right? Because we took September off for the book club. So we announced this mid-September, and I started reading it mid-September, and I finished it yesterday.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's and this is one of those things where you're like, from a critical perspective, like, this book being a slog to get through in a lot of ways is intentional, but
Mm,
does that forgive it for being a slog to get through?
mm,
And I mean, I guess my answer to that is kind of yes, because it's part of the ride of it all. But I mean, yeah, there were definitely parts of this where it was like the Echoes chapter, which someone has already mentioned, is repeating itself, like it's echoing. It's such a tough hang. There's just
mhm.
so much in there. I'm like, I don't care about Echoes. I don't care. Um,
Uh,
but I think overall it's worth it. And I think one of the fascinating things that the book does is when it like, it's kind of breaking its own rules sometimes, where it's like, this is a very scientific, analytical, um, academic review of a fake movie, but then sometimes it, like, allows itself to just be a reenactment, or just like a full scene from that movie with the drama and tension in there. Like, it just,
mm,
the text switches from this academic voice to just relaying the moments,
mm,
and it's like, that doesn't actually make sense within the context of, like, this supposed academic examination of the Navidson record, but like, it works functionally because it's the few moments with the Navidson stuff that you're like actually on the edge of your seat and into it. Um, but like, the book lives in a world in which people have studied, like, the entire culture of the world studies this one documentary. So it really doesn't make sense for the author to like meticulously recreate the scenes. But
yeah.
it doesn't matter, right? It
Well,
doesn't matter.
and also, that's the layers of the onion thing. Is it's like, well, this is all being made up by Zampano, however you say the name,
Hmm.
and and so we're just sort of following the meanderings of his mind, where he's gotten lost. Like, so everyone in the book is lost, right? That's like the theme.
Yeah.
and Zampano, I think Zampano probably,
Yeah.
is lost, and he's trying to make some sense of his life in the world by telling this story, but he's doing it in this way where it's academic and distant for some reason. The reasons why are completely unclear to me. But fun, like he also kind of just wants to tell the story. And the funny thing to me is like, if you, like, based on everything that's described as being in this movie, the Navidson record, it would have to be like hours and hours long, right? Because it's like a photographic, it's like a video record of like hundreds of separate events happening in the house and lost in the hallways, and then like surrounding context of the characters and their backgrounds. And it's just, yeah, it's just way too much. It's
Yeah.
just impossible.
Yeah. I want to touch on something that Luke in chat just said, that the book felt pretentious to them. That's a word I've seen thrown around a lot about this book, and I agree. But I think that's the point. Like, I actually think that the longer I read this book, the more I realized that at least one of the things this book is about, which is many things, but one of the things this book is about is a pretty scathing satire of academia and academic criticism. Because like there's all these moments in the book where like I think he's the author's trying to maintain this level of the same level, but like I just felt him laughing behind I just felt him laughing behind the pages, like especially the moments where Karen shows the 5.5 minute section, or however the exploration 4 section, and then we get to see all these quotes from people about what their interpretation is, what they think of it. And that's when it really clicked for me. It's like, oh, this is just making fun of academia, and it's making fun of the absurdity of taking these things and like really 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 trying to pull minute little bits of meaning out of them, which is fun. It's a fun exercise, and you and I do it sometimes, but like to the level of absurdity that is done in this book and in the hundreds and hundreds of books that it referenced. I think one of my favorite moments was when they're talking about Navidson's dreams, and they're like, the full analysis of this dream is over 200 pages, so I'll try to summarize it best here. And it's just like, come on, folks. Like, come on. They're 200 pages.
Yeah.
Like it's just absurd. And so I agree that it's pretentious. I agree that's there, but like that is to me part of the joke of it.
Yeah, right. Because there's two things that the book that the Zampano academic layer doesn't do. One of them is attempt to actually answer the question of if the house is real in any serious way. I mean, he pokes at the question. It's not that there's no sort of scientific investigation whatsoever, because there is the part where he talks about, well, he's mainly talking about other people that did scientific explanations, and they always sound like they did it in a stupid way, or like a silly, ridiculous way that wouldn't prove anything one way or the other. And then the other thing he doesn't do is ever do what you would consider just like a basic literary analysis of the Navidson record as fiction.
Yeah.
Like, just take it as fiction and say, what is this about? What is this saying? It doesn't do that either, really. Like I think you could argue against that statement that I just said, but it's like, never does he approach it on the level that we're trying to approach books typically. Like when we have a conversation about a book and we analyze the narrative and we analyze the characters, he doesn't do that. Like it's like you just said, it's emphasizing the degree to which like the tools of analysis are sort of useless for actually achieving any understanding, which I think is actually close to the theme, because none of the characters really seem to get much of an understanding of anything.
Yeah.
Like, we haven't talked much about Johnny yet, but like Johnny's story is like the most intentionally frustrating thing I've ever read in my life. Because you want him to either get over it or get out of the situation or experience some kind of catharsis or growth, or at least just die tragically. But it's just, he just sort of descends and descends and descends, and then the book ends.
Yeah.
And you have no idea what happens to him.
I think
Um,
we like there's one footnote that mentions it's an editor footnote that mentions that he's missing or something. Or no, I think it's the editor puts in a response by one of the women that Johnny mentions in his section. And it's just like casually like, I heard he was missing now. I hope he's okay. And
uh-huh,
you're just like, that's like in the middle of the book, and you're like, what?
uh-huh,
It's yeah, fascinating. And then of course the meta nature of it, that he sees people reading the book, but that was probably just in his head. Like, this is the one thing we have to talk about, and I think the letters from his mother are kind of the key to unlocking this. Is how much was this whole thing just in his head?
yeah,
Because his mother was, schizophrenic and deeply unwell, and it seems like a fair read of this book is just like, so is Johnny, and this is all made up, and this is all
yeah.
just in his head.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think Johnny's character is so incredibly tragic. I want to return just briefly to what you said about, I didn't read the books, the letters from his mom until the end.
Hmm.
And so for me, it was actually a mystery to me. Like, why is Johnny so messed up? Like, not to the point of like what is it that haunts Johnny exactly? Because
Hmm.
I feel like, I don't know, if the answer is just like, oh, he has schizophrenia, then it's like, okay, well, that's fine. But I guess that feels a little bit unsatisfying. But I guess sometimes the world is unsatisfying. Um, but I didn't. But like, when I finally got to the mom letters, I was like, oh my god, what a horrible thing to have to live with. Where like he'll receive these letters from his mom, which is his mom. It's like the most important person in your world in some ways,
Yeah.
and he would get like these loving, supportive letters, and then he would get these absolutely insane letters demanding that he like buy her a suitcase so that she could escape, and like just full of delusions, and just the seesaw of that over the course of his entire life. Like, it was painful to me to see like the dates on the letters, because you're realizing like how much of his life is just punctuated by
Yeah.
these letters that are just reminding him of this terrible sadness.
And mixed in those, like, the fun thing about reading them when I read them and not when you read them, is that you hadn't learned the history of him, in with the father that he went to
Mm,
live with, and who, beat the shit out. You hadn't learned all that yet, when you first are sent to the letters, and that's kind of in the background of the letters from his mom. Like you don't get to see his letters to her, you just see her letters. And that's like, I think it's so great how like that story is kind of playing out in the background. Oh, you went to Alaska, and to work, and like there's all these things you didn't know yet about Johnny, if you read the letters when they first send you to them. And
mm,
so that story kind of builds itself. And yeah, I mean, there's so much with him, right? There's his burned arms that we learn, partially as the fault of his mother. There's a sequence in which she strangled him, and that's kind of the moment that she was sent away after she almost strangled him. But then at the end of the book, like, he basically decides that he doesn't think that actually happened, although
mm,
I just think it did. Like, I think that's just him trying to rewrite his past, to make it better, because it all kind of goes back to his mom, right? That's where the book ends. His moment in the book ends is this return to his house, that is not there anymore, and all that.
mhm. Yeah, exactly. Um,
Yeah.
I'm seeing some remarks in the chat, from both Wolf Tamer and Tyler, that they both under the impression that Johnny escapes the narrative, which, you know mark me some point deductions. I didn't. I'm desperately trying to remember the last bit of the Johnny story, and what that. I mean, do you know what this is, Scott? Because I want this to be true. Like, I love this. I love this as a resolution for Johnny's character, is that he escapes the narrative. I just didn't pick up on that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess technically true, just because, he he's gone. Like, you have his chapter, that he almost, like, he is the first time you see him not in a footnote. He has his own chapter in the book, right? It's no
Hmm.
longer footnotes, it's his chapter. He goes through all his stuff, and he then is gone from the book. The book ends with a couple more chapters from the Zambano stuff, and there's no more Johnny. We don't see from him again. So I mean, I guess technically, yes, in the like the literal interpretation of it, he's not in the narrative anymore, so he's out. But I didn't. I guess I didn't feel positive and hopeful about his life after this.
Yeah, I was definitely left on a down note. Not across the board, because the Navidsons do end up, back together, although he's like horribly maimed.
And she's
Um,
dying.
she's
She has
done. Yeah, I,
cancer.
I've heard this described as a love story wrapped in several layers of meta, and I think there's something to that, because one of the through lines that you're invested in is like, are we just watching a marriage, or not even a marriage, this relationship between these two people that's dissolving, or what? Like, is this going anywhere? Is this just a tragedy? Is this a horror movie? Like, is the point of this that we're going to watch these people get picked apart and killed one by one?
Yeah.
I kind of actually thought that's where we were going, because I kind of know the cultural legacy of this book, and I was like, oh, this is horror. They're all going to get lost, and people do get lost and killed and shot and eaten by the house, but less in that direction than I kind of thought we were going to go. It's more metaphorical.
Yeah. So while you were talking, I kind of just briefly flipped through the book to refresh my memory. The Johnny section of the book ends with him burning the book. Although, again, I think the book itself calls into question the reality of that particular thing, because who knows, right? And then he tells a story of a woman who has a baby born with holes in its head, and it's that beautiful tragic story of her, staying by the baby's side nonstop, and then everyone being convinced that this means that the baby is going to make some miraculous recovery, but she just lets it go. So I mean, I guess you could argue like the letting go moment is supposed to be read as like more positive than like this idea that that's this metaphor for holding on to something, and then just allowing it to go. But yeah, I don't know. I still don't know if I feel like super positive on where the life of Johnny Truant is going from here.
It definitely felt like a downer for me, because it seemed like everything about his situation was just getting worse and worse, and there was nothing to really turn it around. Like,
Yeah.
his friend died. The closest thing to a catharsis with him for me was like he meets up with Thumper again, and
He learns
like
her name.
it learns her name, and like very like sort of very actively is like, I'm not gonna sleep with her. I could, but I'm not going to. And then he leaves,
Yeah.
which to me felt like a kind of character growth, although I can't exactly put my finger on like what the nature of that is. I mean, I guess it's just that with all the other women that he sleeps with, graphically in the book,
Yeah.
it's like it's about escapism, and I saw it also as being a metaphor for like he's lost, because he's getting distracted, and each of these sexual escapades is equivalent to a sort of wandering throughout the hallways. I'm quite sure that the vagina is compared to a labyrinth at least once in a fairly straightforward way, and I think that's kind of thematically what we're doing with all of that stuff in the book, which qualifies it as literature, because there's weird sex stuff in there.
Of course. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Like the book burning, I think could be seen in any other story as a hopeful, positive. Like, oh, you're putting the stuff behind you. Your obsession with this book that has been destroying you is coming to an end. But then in the universe we're living in, well, the book was published. There's editors making footnotes about the book, right? So like the book burning can't have actually happened. I mean, this is the thing, is like this final Johnny chapter has kind of set us up to not take what he's saying 100% seriously, right? Because there's that whole section where he says, "Oh, I got together with some doctor friends of mine, and they really helped me, and I'm back on the mend, and everything's getting better, and I found a magic pill that cures the way I feel." And then it's like, haha, just kidding. You believed that shit,
Idiot.
yeah, you idiot. But then he references the doctor again later, like that he's already said was a made up doctor, but he references it again. Like, he's just going insane. He's just completely losing it. And so it's really, it's really tough to take anything in there at face value at all.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it's all made up. Like that's one question I kept getting like snarled around as I was like, so like in the universe of the Navidson record, is the house real? And it's like th- there is no universe of the Navidson record. It was made up by the character who was made up by the author who exists in the universe of Johnny Truant, except maybe not even because
Mhm.
you could just imagine that the whole book was written by Johnny Truant.
Yeah,
You
sure.
could imagine that that Zampano was made up and but by Johnny Truant, and this is all um his fiction that he has written to sort out his own life because he never meets Zampano. It could be kind of a Fight Club situation, you know. I feel like there was one note in there that made me actually lean toward that as a guess. That like I think it was the idea that Johnny's mom kept harping on what a good writer he was, and like I forgot, man. Now I'm forgetting the detail, but it was like if this guy is sort of a writer, it's like it would make sense for him to have confabulated
Yeah.
the whole thing. And
Well,
it's funny because the other funny thing is like he frequently makes typos and misspellings in his sections,
yeah.
but then he's also capable. Like he can both. Sometimes he sounds like an idiot, and then sometimes he writes really beautifully.
Yep.
And I think that's another like interesting sort of like what do we do? Which one of these is the true Johnny Truant? You know?
The answer
Um,
is yes.
yes,
No,
right.
but I think that's yeah, that's part of the mystery that is this book. And this is, we've been trying to peel back the layers here and get to the bottom of this. And I think part of the book is that there is no bottom of this to get to, right? But I just think that's why I respect the fuck out of this thing is like the detail. Like this book took 10 years to write. And I completely understand why it took 10 years to write because the detail of everything, from the all these made up big bibliographies we have to do for all these made up things for this Navidson documentary. But then, as you said, the truant sections are filled with misspellings, are filled with I don't think he ever spells a lot correctly once in the entire book. It's always one word the whole every single time. But yeah, then it has some of the most beautiful purple writing in it. It'll go from him like in detail describing his latest sexual escapade to him like looking at the sunset and pondering existence in this beautifully profound way.
Mhm.
And it there's no consistency to it, and it like all of this stuff had to be meticulously planned. Like we talk about the type of writing that Stephen King does, and like you can't write a book like this that way. Like you just can't.
Yeah.
And I love the idea of it. I love that it exists. I love that I got to explore it for a while. But like, I even sitting here like trying to talk about it and delve into like the deeper meanings of what this book was saying, I'm not even sure I know. Like, I
Mhm.
get some of it, and some of the images spoke to me beautifully. We haven't talked about Navidson very much. We're gonna need to,
Yeah.
but the image at the very end of his part of the book of a man like desperately trying to read a book that happens to be called House of Leaves while burning the book to provide the light to read the book
Mhm.
was one of the most like wonderful, fascinating. Like I fell in love with that image the first time I read it. Like I just like it's so like, and I'm not even sure I can 100% tell you, well, this is what that means. Just like the idea of it though, this race between the light that the thing is providing you is also destroying. Like I just love it. I love it all.
Mhm.
I guess it's just life, right? That's just like
Yeah.
you're desperate to experience and see everything there is while you're burning the very thing that is
Yeah.
allowing you to do that.
Well, that's yeah. So I do want to talk about Navis, and maybe we can kind of zig from here. But I wanted to say, like, I think the book is about being lost, like I said before, but it's also just about death.
Mhm.
Um, because I don't think I'm straining too much to say like what the darkness of the house represents, and what the growl represents, and what everything Johnny is running from represents, and these sort of interstitial stories we get about people trapped in sunken ships that are slowly filling with water. It's all about death and the inevitability of death, the inexorable, encroaching inevitability of death, and there's no escape. And even if there's a reprieve, it's still going to get you in the end, and it's
Hmm.
terrifying. And we try to avoid thinking about it, but that's what it is. And like the house is like this machine for forcing you to confront it, and that's why it drives people crazy. Is it's like sort of testing what becomes of you when you're faced directly with death.
Yeah.
Um, and I think I think that death is an idea that the author was struggling with, like on a personal level too.
Yeah, I
Um,
think this was either his father was diagnosed with cancer or his father had just passed away from cancer when he started working on this book. And I think the knowledge of that does shed a light on this. Like, oh yeah, you're dealing with this stuff. And I mean, I think that's also one of the reasons like the Johnny character lost his father. And yeah, there's death everywhere and
yeah,
the relentlessness of it for sure.
yeah, and the feeling of being stalked by it and the fear of it.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so Navidson, I mean, Navidson's there's sort of two protagonists, right? One protagonist is Johnny Truant, who we've talked about mostly, and then the other protagonist is Navidson. There's probably a third protagonist, which would be Zampano, if you want to think about him as an active character. But anyway,
Yeah, I felt him the least
yeah,
out of the
yeah,
three for sure.
yeah. But you can definitely see him if you look for him.
Yeah.
But yeah, Navidson. But then Navidson is like way more of a distant presence than Johnny Truant, which I think is maybe why we talked about Johnny so much, because Navidson, you're always getting sort of, you know, everything Navidson says has a footnote. It's like, oh, this is from the last interview, or this is from, this particular video. And it never just feels like he's really speaking to you. It feels like you're hearing his voice echo down a corridor,
Hmm.
metaphorically. And, and we never see into his head, right? That's the biggest difference between, um, Johnny and Navidson is we really never see into his head. Like the only exception I would say is when he writes a letter to Karen,
Hmm.
and it's almost like, oh, he's kind of like a different person than I thought he was. Like he comes off as this like extremely like cold, um like like operator. He's just like efficient and fairly emotionless. And in that letter, it's like, oh, he's a dude just like anybody, and he's
Yeah.
he's really broken up about the death of his brother, and he's obsessed with this house, and this all totally makes sense. It's just not the impression that the text had kind of
Yeah.
given me, largely because of Zampano's sort of distant academic style, the way he portrays everything.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of the I think testaments to the skill of the writing is that like I agree with you. The descriptions of him are so cold and academic, but like you do by the end of it really get to feel the person under there. You start getting this like the shape of who he is kind of slowly constructed over the course of it, and it's from the perspective of the book constructed coldly, but from the perspective of us, the reader, I think you really start to feel it. And I agree with you. The letter is a nice touch that really helps, and the Pulitzer Prize winning photo, which as referenced in the footnote in this book, is a real photo that really won the Pulitzer and was critiqued for the exact same reasons that Navidson is critiqued here. I don't know if literally the first thing I did when that's referenced is went to Google and Googled the photo. It's a photo I had seen before, but yeah, it's horrifying. But yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, he's a really complicated, fascinating guy, and I don't fully know what to make of all of it, but just this I think you're right that like he's built as because he's this war photographer and he goes to these dangerous places and like risks his life. He seems like this person that is not going to be fleeing from death in the same way that the others are. But I think when the chips are down, he's running from it just like we all are.
yeah, yeah. I think that's right. I also, yeah, I wanted to mention, the idea of the photo, the Delisle photo, I
Hmm.
guess is how you say it. And I was interested to see like how late in the story that actually shows up, and it really actually kind of changed my sense of who he was as a character, because clearly he has been haunted by the idea of like being stalked by death and the floating phantom of death. Um, and he has this picture up in his house. And it is really interesting. Like that, not only is this a real picture, but wait, so is it true that the photographer actually killed themselves, or is that just a?
That I didn't research. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I'm not sure either. I'm not sure.
I'm inclined to say yes because I feel like the book does like it makes stuff up a lot, but I feel like when it's referencing stuff that's real, it's usually referencing it correctly.
Yeah, I
So
think
I
that
don't know.
might be true because that's yeah. I mean, yeah, God, it's heavy stuff. I mean,
Oh
you
yeah.
hear that story and you're like, okay, yeah, I can see why. I can see why we did that. Oh yeah,
Mhm.
it says it's true. Um, well, no, never mind, never mind. Forget I said that because that's I'm trying to read while talking. And that's never a good idea. Anyway, yeah, yeah, he is a full and rich character. And then another thing I was surprised by was like, um, we're sort of in some ways we're sort of poisoned against Karen. I mean, she makes some choices that make us dislike her, and then I think also the narrative voice is sort of like she's not being very supportive.
Yeah,
Um,
the oh gosh, Zampano, which is an interesting thing you can dissect in its own,
mhm.
doesn't seem to like her very much.
Yeah,
At least early on, she's
right.
presented as like the like Navidson's the perfect angel, and she's like the Skylar White to his
Yes.
Walter.
Yeah. Well said because she's the sane one who just wants to get out of the situation.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, in fact, like as the funny thing, one funny thing to me is like the idea that the dimensions of the house change was introduced so early that I actually forgot about it.
hmm
And then when I remembered, like much later, I was like, wait a second, why are they afraid to go into the hallway? The whole house is a supernatural,
yeah,
monster. And then of course it's like, yeah, the house then tries to kill them all and successfully kills his brother. But it's like they all forgot about that, and sort of including her. Like I think she was stressed out about it, but then she got distracted by it, by the fact that Navison kept going into the hallway.
hmm yeah. I mean, I think they saw like to continue the death metaphor. I think they saw like the dangerous part of the house being the part down that hallway, and like this false feeling of closing that door and putting four locks on it is like
Mhm.
could be a metaphor for the way we deal with death as we just put it. Yeah, we know it's in this big house called life, but we're not in that part of the house, so we don't gotta worry about it, and
Yeah.
it's behind a door, and we'll open it, we'll get there, but we don't gotta worry about it.
But then you're totally right, and I enjoyed all of that, and I enjoy how successful it is as like a horror book. But then like we get a whole chapter that's like the reappraisal of Karen chapter where she makes this other movie or two movies, which are like one of them is just like about how much she loves Navidson,
Mhm.
and like she sort of like transforms as a person. I love some of the description in there where it talks about like her smile is different and just like her whole manner is different now after having been exposed to the house. Um, and then she ends up going back to the house and rescuing him, which is just beautiful. It's just a beautiful like way of ending that story.
Yeah, yeah.
And I loved it. I honestly did.
It is this interesting thing, the way it's revealed how much she is responsible for the documentary, I think is really interesting because like, yeah, like we said at the beginning, it's kind of like this is his baby, and the Zampano spends pages and pages and pages like glowingly talk about Navitson's skill as a filmmaker, as a photographer and an editor, right? Like the choice to hold on this, the choice to frame this, like these brilliant choices, and then we learn how much of the movie was actually put together by her. It is really fascinating because the reasons why he seems to dislike her and revere him are not quite as true as everything was made out to be.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah,
Um, but yeah, I mean, I agree with you that their story, I thought that th- this is a book that affected me emotionally in weird ways. Like, it wasn't like I was always like feeling the emotion of the moment itself. I was just feeling this kind of existential discomfort. But yeah, I thought that moment was beautiful in its way. That
Mm.
she kind of the kind of the cleanest culmination of an arc is her getting over her claustrophobia to step into the darkness to get him.
Mm.
Of course, it, I guess kind of get a happy ending. They get married,
Yeah,
and but yeah, like you said, he's horribly maimed by the experience. She is has cancer and is, seemingly recovering from that
yeah.
cancer.
Well, I mean, the way I saw that is I didn't see that as too much of a downer because I was basically like, okay, they went through a horrifying ordeal,
Yeah,
but they came out of it like together and stronger and in love, and
sure.
that's kind of, I guess, what matters, you could say,
Yeah,
because we all face challenges in life and we're all going to die, but what matters is like, are we going to be with the people who we care about, and so on that count,
yeah.
they do win. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I think so. There's so many different things we could tackle, right? I guess one thing I wanted to focus on, at least for a minute, is like the unique nature of the horror, and um, specifically, so that I say over and over that like I love like the horror of the unknown, and I actually really really appreciate that the book never explains the house.
Yeah. Thank God.
Despite the fact the whole book is sort of trying to explain the house, the book never explains the house. um, and it's like the flavor of the horror. Part of it is just like, you go to the bottom of the stairwell and then you realize the stairwell has grown to be infinity stories tall,
I
and
love
you're going to
that.
starve to death.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, so part of the horror there is like, oh, I'm lost and I'm cold and I'm going to starve, and that is its own source of horror. But to
Hmm.
me, like the deeper level of horror is like, why is it doing this? Like, what, why did it do that, and then it like reverses it and it lets Navidson survive,
Yeah.
and it lets the one group get lost, and then it lets Navidson find them, but then the one guy dies immediately, and then it's it's like it's screwing with them, but if so, why? Like, what is it? Is it even an agent, or am I totally off base in calling it an agent in the first place? And it's just, the different people at different points in the book are like, maybe it's just reacting to what you bring into the house, and it's
Yeah.
like, well, maybe, but I don't really feel like that's like the answer.
Yeah.
So I just love that there's no answer. I love that it's genuinely, it's upsetting at a deeper level than I can remember being upset by a horror premise before.
Yeah. I mean, I think why did kids get cancer? Like why do incredibly healthy people get sick and then incredibly unhealthy people live well into their seven? Like, it's just the fickle nature of existence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why do these things happen? Um, there is no answer. There's no
Mm-hmm.
satisfying answer. Yeah, and as Bipolar On is saying, I think Johnny spilling ink over the portions of the text that go into the most detail about the scientific analysis is very intentional. Is
Uh-huh.
very very intentional, that we're saying that like
Yeah,
this shit doesn't matter. Did love the dating of the little flecks that
yeah.
go in chronological order from very recent to older than older than the solar system. I thought that was just a great touch. But yeah, that's like the one moment of fun mixed into this whole section that is very clearly saying none of this shit matters. Why are you trying to do this? This is a waste of time. Really great
Hmm.
stuff.
Yeah, I love that too. And I mean, if Johnny were gonna just make it all up, then he could just, not have bothered to write the scientific analysis in the first place, and then say that it was
Hmm.
destroyed. So
Yeah,
um, I
but
only
that's
mentioned that
that's
because I enjoyed that theory. Sorry. Go
yeah.
ahead.
But that, I mean, that's part of it though. Like, it could still be true. It could still like it could all happen.
Yeah.
Speaking of the house and the non-answer of it, there was this one moment. The first I remember distinctly reading it the first time, and on this reread as well, like because I had forgotten that Johnny has decided to go to his childhood home. Um, and I was like, oh no, don't make that be the house. That would be like, just in my head. And I'm not even sure why I felt that in the time, but I just felt like that's the exact wrong choice to
Mm,
just like he rolls up and sees that, oh, it's the house. I don't even know how they would do that because he's never seen the house, because he just sees, like, he's just reading. But like I just had the strong feeling that that's what we were gonna do, and I just remember the incredible sense of relief that the author recognized that was the wrong choice, that was the wrong thing to do.
yeah.
Uh,
Well, what I liked about his childhood house is destroyed, right? It's gone,
yep, yep.
and for me that was like, well, that is the house. The house is that you're lost and you'll never find home again.
Sure, sure.
Um,
But it didn't need to be,
yeah,
it didn't need to be the actual, like,
yeah,
that metaphor works, and that imagery works the way he did it. It didn't need to be as quite as literal as that, and that's what I appreciated
yeah,
about it.
yeah.
Because yeah, I mean, you're right. Like, I mean, we haven't talked about the title actually, right? Like, we haven't
Mhm.
talked about House of Leaves and what that means. Um, I guess what was your interpretation of this choice?
So I don't know if this is a common reaction or not, but like as soon as I picked up the book, I was like, well, a page is a leaf.
Mm-hmm.
So a book is a book. You can see a book as being a house of leaves. It's a structure made of pages. It's a house of leaves, and
Mm-hmm.
we're gonna and then I only sort of felt reinforced in that as we went on, because you're getting lost in this labyrinth, in this house made out of leaves. You are getting lost in the book, just as the characters are getting lost in the house. You're getting turned around and failing to backtrack and getting lost in chains of footnotes and so forth. And then I felt pretty solid in that, and I'm not saying I decided I was wrong, but the book does eventually sort of give you a visual metaphor of a house of leaves through a poem somewhere in there, where the intent of the metaphor is to talk about like the ephemeral nature of a house of leaves, because it like blows away
Yeah.
um, in a gust of wind. It's the metaphor is something like, it makes as much sense of making your house out of leaves or something. It's something along those lines. It's like, oh, okay, I get that too. It's about the transient nature of life. So that was my overall thoughts on the title. What do you think?
Yeah, that's basically my interpretation of it. I mean, you can get really fun and being like, it's a house of leaving because they
Mm-hmm.
they leave.
Sure, sure. Well,
uh,
yeah, we all leave
yeah,
eventually.
we do. We all leave. We leave our house,
Hmm.
but we stay in this house of existence because it's an infinite house.
Until we die,
Yeah,
and then we leave.
but where do we go?
I don't
I
know.
don't know. The Langoliers eat us up.
Yeah, Langoliers eat us up. You've always been the caretaker.
Stop it. Um, yeah. So I don't know. God, I feel like, so there's like 20 more characters we could talk about. There's like infinite things we could do with this, but we've been going for almost an hour, and like I don't want to do a 3 hour show. So I mean, is there anything else specifically that you wanted to talk about? And folks in chat, is there anything specifically that y'all wanted to talk about before we send this thing home to the finish line? Matt, you got anything?
I'm thinking. I kind of wish I had it in front of me, because I feel like if I just like opened to a random page, I would be struck by something.
So someone did mention like a fun fact of like that there is that rule is established in the letters from Johnny's mom, that like if there's a check mark in the lower right hand side of the page, it means like it's a code, and that there is a random page in this book that is check marked that way. Is that's a lot of really
Yeah,
fun stuff.
that's so funny, because I remember noticing the check mark while reading and being like, oh, is this gonna be important? And then I honestly totally forgot about it until right now, where you're reminding me that was the code.
Hmm.
So now I want to go back and see what was on that page.
Yeah, I don't even.
Um,
It's so funny that I saw the check mark and then just went, "Oh, neat," and then just
uh,
kept reading. Didn't think like, "Oh, maybe there's something." I did you. So there's a letter from Johnny's mother where she says that you know that the message to him will be the first letter of every word in the letter, and it's a
uh,
really really long letter. Did you take the time to decipher the thing? I
I
did. I did it all. It took forever. I did it. And I was like, "Oh, it's just a ramblings of an insane woman." I'm glad I spent my time doing this.
No, I didn't because as I was going through the appendices, my attitude was like, I'm gonna just blow through this and then come back later and reread things that I think might need closer inspection. And then that second part never actually happened. So,
Hmm.
um, um, Hello is asking about standout moments, which is I think a fun filter because I immediately think about like the moment I referenced a minute ago where the spiral staircase gets like unfathomably long in like 5 seconds, with Navy still at the bottom of it, and it's like he like somebody drops something off the
It's a penny.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think his brother drops a coin or whatever, and like based on the calculation, it would just be some absurd distance. I don't even remember what it was. It was just like I remember being like affected by the sense of physically impossible vastness and the horror of knowing like that's how far away you are from escape.
It
Um,
was it was like longer than the diameter of the Earth, right? I think
yeah,
is what
yeah,
was described as, which was really great.
yeah.
Um, yeah, Mr. Roboto is mentioning myhouse.wad, which is apparently like a game version of this. I did see that. I haven't checked it out, but I would be curious to mention that.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
I just mentioned, the backroom stuff. There's a couple backrooms videos. One of them is literally a guy like finds a hole in the ground and goes into it, and he's like, "Oh, neat! It's like a little stairway that goes down," and then he
mhm.
just like goes down and down and down and down and down and down and down. And he's like, "I should start back. It's gonna be a lot harder to go up. I should start." And it's really good. Like it's very like it's exactly it exactly hits the notes that it needs to hit, like for this kind of horror, and it doesn't overdo it. I'll probably put it in like the Discord or something so people can see the one I'm talking about. But there's a lot of good backroom stuff, backrooms YouTube videos and so forth that really remind me of House
Yeah.
of Leaves.
Yeah, another standout moment for me is the Stephen King appearance in this book, which I thought was
Mm.
marvelous and actually I think perfectly depicts Stephen King. So it's in the chapter of Karen sending all the short she cut to all these literary folks, and his response to it is basically like he really likes it. It's creepy, but he's commenting on someone else's use of metaphor, and he's like, "Oh yeah, that's a good metaphor. That's great." But he basically is like, "Sometimes a whale is also just a whale," which is just a perfect King thing. Like it's clear that the author likes Stephen King a lot,
Yeah,
because that is absolutely something King would say. Is that yeah, like it's a great metaphor, but sometimes it's also just a whale.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I liked. There's another comment in there where they were like, what would you think about this? And he was like, I think it was darn scary. I was like, yeah,
yeah.
that's perfect. Yeah, I mean, I felt like there was a genuine affection for Stephen King coming out of
Hmm.
the page, which I
Yeah,
appreciated, obviously.
especially in a chapter that is so like laser sharp in its satirical critique of a lot of these academic institutions. Like I mean, the bits of people um hitting on her
Hmm.
in the middle of like asking their opinions on stuff like it was just remarkable. Like I just
Yeah,
really liked it.
yeah. Well, that actually made me enjoy the fact that it was so like kind to Stephen King even more because a lot
Yeah.
of the characters in there are like real people
Yeah.
who've
Yeah.
come out looking like shit. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Um
yeah, it mentioned doesn't it mention more? I think it mentioned Stephen King more than once in the story. I don't remember the other mention though.
Possibly, possibly. Yeah. Metathulu asks, "How do you feel this book compares to other works of existential horror, either those that came before or those that came after?" That's a great question. Maybe I can kind of piggyback on your question to, with another question, which is I saw before I read this book a lot of the reviews and the way it was talked about on the internet talk about it as a terrifying journey. And like it's definitely a horror novel, and I understand the existential horror and things that exist in it that definitely drove me to levels of uncomfortable like ponderings. about myself and the universe and my existence and all these things. But like I never found the book particularly terrifying. Maybe it's just I'm using the word terrifying different from the people who refer to it that way. I'm just curious what you thought, Matt. Like, were you? I didn't think the book was scary in that kind of way.
I agree. Especially given the expectation. I had read some of the things you had read, or maybe it's even on the back of the book or something, just like, the most terrifying thing I've ever read. And I'm like, seriously?
Hmm.
I mean, like you said, I love how you just put that though, where it's like, it definitely made me sort of like, do the thing where you like put the book down for a second and like
Hmm.
stare and, and contemplate the existential implications of the thing that you just read. But I wouldn't say terrifying. I never felt a thrill of fear. I never, this is not a book where like I had any trouble like turning off the lights and walking around my house. Unlike some books where it's like, maybe you want, yeah, I'm just going to turn this light on when I go get water,
Sure, sure.
it wasn't that kind of fear, but it was a
Yeah, I
deeper,
never felt that.
unsettling feeling.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it has to do with, like, if I say to you, like, you're going to die someday, you're just like, oh yeah, I guess so, whatever, sure, whatever. Yeah, I knew that. Thanks. But like the book has a way of being like, we're not going to talk about it, but we're going to remind you over and over and over in 100 different ways, many like operating at like 7 different layers of metaphor, that you're going to die someday, and that
Hmm.
death is stalking you, and that you could die any moment. Actually,
Yeah.
it could be right behind you right now, and that did unsettle me at a fairly deep level. Again, not terrified,
Hmm.
but like the creepiest part to me was actually very early in the book, when really the story is just introducing this idea that like the dimensions of the house change slightly, and then they find a door that shouldn't be there.
Hmm.
Like that was the creepiest thing that happened. And then once we get past that point, it almost becomes like borderline adventure, where it's like, oh, now
Yeah.
we're gonna explore this.
Yeah.
um
I think Expedition One is Navidson's like first foray into the house by himself, where he sneaks in that night, right, and gets lost and panicked, and that worked on me
mm,
on the creepy scale. But
mm.
yeah, after that, they get in the adventure people, and yeah, it changes a little bit in that. So I agree with you there. Yeah, so
Mm.
part of me wonders, like, this is a thing. You obviously read the book because there is no audiobook, because how could you possibly do an audiobook to this? That there's too much leafing around, and it just wouldn't work. And then obviously, like, you think adaptations. There's been no adaptation of the story, although I remember seeing a trailer for a movie once, and it was like they find a secret door in a house and don't know where it leads, and I was like, are they're not doing a House of Leaves adaptation, are they? But it is interesting because, like, part of me wonders, we talk about these themes we've been talking about, and I think that the thing that elevates and makes this book most interesting is its non-traditional design and structure and all these things. But like, you could just do a story that is just in essence the Navidson record, right? Like, you could just tell that story from beginning to end,
Yeah.
cut out all the other stuff, and I don't think it would be as good as this book is, because I think the ways this book is good, and we talked about, is all these different layers and things, and but that, I mean, it would be a kind of basic existential horror story, that could also still deal with the inevitability of death and those kind of themes. You could do that, right? And I think it's really interesting that the author, maybe that was the first kernel of the idea, and then he just kind of spun out from there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I sorry, I kind of mentally derailed because I had been thinking about how you would do a film adaptation of this, and I was actually like, yeah, you could. You'd have to change it quite a lot.
Hmm.
It would really have to be an adaptation, not a transliteration. But you would do like, you know some people making a documentary about a movie, and it's about the people making the documentary about the movie, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you've got like 3 layers, and then part of it is just showing the movie, and then part of it is showing the documentary, and then part of it is showing the lives of the people making the documentary, and that one of them is your Johnny Truant, basically. And he's probably just a guy like running around with a video camera or something, or he's analyzing a documentary that he found or something, whatever.
Yeah.
It would have to be totally adapted to the medium of film, but you could do that.
Yeah. Yeah, Methuselah reminds me of something I had completely forgotten that uh, Danielewski like wrote like a a couple scripts for like what a TV show would look like and put them on the internet at some point. I got to track those down and find them. I'm really curious what those looked like. But I think you're right that you could tailor it to the medium and do something really interesting with it. I would love to see something like that happen.
Yeah.
Probably never will though.
Bipolaron says Marble Hornets was heavily inspired by House of Leaves, and I did not know that. I love Marble Hornets.
I didn't know that, but like as soon as they said it, I was like, yeah, that makes perfect sense, actually. And I think maybe that's where we can wrap everything up. Like, I feel like this was a hugely influential thing in 21st century horror. You already talked about the back rooms. I don't think like directly inspired possibly, but indirectly sure. Like this idea, like I mean this idea of these never ending hallways and rooms is like not like this book did not create that idea, right? But I think it popularized it. And I think there's a lot of work that spun out of this, really exploring this idea. Hugely influential book.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'd be interested to see what was the first like endless hallways, endless house book. I'm looking up something, but yeah, I don't know. I have no idea. When did this book come out? Actually,
2000. It was like, like that was the big thing. I remember like heralded as like the first great work of the 21st century of the new millennium. The first truly unique and original and inventive. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's cool. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a fresh angle.
Yeah, I think the other thing we should mention about this is I believe Danielewski's sister made like a accompanying album, like music album that is referenced on the back of the book. If you go to www.realpo.com, that is where that is, and it's supposed to be like accompanying thing, like right, they link together. I haven't listened to it, but I just thought I'd mention that.
Yeah, I'd like to listen to that. When I searched, of course, I feel stupid because I was reminded of the first recorded instance of labyrinths, which is the Minotaur, obviously.
no, Matt, that has a line through it. Don't read that part.
Scratched through. It's not part of this book. Yeah,
I really loved that. I really like the systematic attempt to remove the monster that's hunting you from the book. Maybe if I just cross it out of the book, it will stop hunting me. That's really great.
That was the last thing I wanted to mention is and it's what Heller just said. The idea of the monster, which is really only present in the beginning of the book, that like Truant thinks there's like a physical monster chasing him, and maybe sort of like attacks him when he's in the closet of the tattoo parlor.
Yeah.
And then you kind of never hear from this physical monster again, and it becomes much more just like a vague dread at all times type thing.
Yeah, that's true. Isn't it interesting that like you would think that as his deterioration worsened, like logic would tell that the visions, the hallucinations, or the attacks from the monster would become more frequent, more real, more present. But that the exact opposite happens actually.
Yeah. And the monster description or whatever it is that he sees in the closet is actually like the straight up scariest part of the book, because it's a terrifying image. Whatever, I've actually forgotten exactly what it is, but it's like it was something that was quite disturbing, and then it doesn't show up again. So that is really interesting choice.
Yeah. Anything else on House of Leaves? God, we could do like there is like if you go to the subreddit, man, like there are people that spend like due to this book what the people in the book do to the film, right? Where they just like meticulously go through, and there's so much detail here. He spent so much time with this thing and building it, and incredible work, incredible work. Yeah, not always the most fun book to read at times, but like I'm just in awe of this choice of taking one of the most explored mediums ever, which is the novel that's been around for hundreds of years, and
Yeah.
saying, I think we can do something different and cool and unique and new with it, and succeeding in all ways. Like you said, it's not just the experience of reading the words, but like where the words are placed and how it makes you flip back and forth and all these things. Like you just watch a person read this book, and it's like, at the scenes where he's you're just going like, you're just like having to turn your book upside down and sideways and like flipping through it. Just like observing a person read this book must be a wild experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's also, I will say, very hard when you are trying to make sure that you are reading enough to not have to read 200, 300 pages in the final couple days before book club. It is very, very difficult to know how far into this book you are by just looking at it, which is
Yeah.
again another cool thing, because you can kind of almost see what that is a problem. If I want to make this book maze, like I want to make people feel like they're lost within this book, within this house, but like the thing about books is you always know when you're nearing the end, because you can just look at the physical object in your hand and see how many pages are left. You can just do that. And it's like, how do I solve that problem? Well, I'm going to put this giant appendix in and I'm going to stuff it with stuff, but I'm also going to have people go back and forth. And then like it's a 700-page book, but like 60 of the pages are 2 sentences on each one. And it just makes it impossible to know, how far into the thing you are.
Yeah. No, that's great. I love how that, I didn't even think about that fact, but I was literally lost as I was racing for the finish line, being like, where am I? Where am I relative to the finish line, which is of course the end of the book.
Mm-hmm.
How close am I? Which is fantastic. Yeah. You never know where you are in the House of Leaves.
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, what a book. I love it. Love it. This is going to be one of those ones that, I mean, it's the second time I've read it, obviously, that I feel like I'm going to need to revisit every not, I mean, not a couple of years, but maybe every decade. Just go back and maybe, like, the cool thing about a book like this is I don't think you always need to read it cover to cover. Like this could be one of those things that I can imagine just like walking by my bookshelf, opening it up and just reading a few pages of it and just being reabsorbed into what this book is doing. I think it's really cool that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So good book. Good book.
Good book.
All right, we are about to close the poll for the November book club. So if you have not voted, let me just share that again for folks that maybe showed up a little bit late. Here's the link. Please vote, and we will hold this open. It is still very close. It's very close. All right. So Wolf Tamer mentions Homestuck, and kind of the reason why we weren't like intentionally ignoring you or anything. I've not read that and have no insights into that. I do understand. I do know it like broadly as a thing that really messed with its medium, but that's all I know.
Yeah, and I also know that it's absurdly long, which makes it difficult for me to be able to commit to starting it, which is problem.
I will say like the Marble Hornets comparison I think is really great, because Marble Hornets is a thing that you and I both, I think, found independently of each other and really loved. Like not only did I love Marble Hornets, but like for a while there I was like, I want to do something like this. Like this is such a cool idea of just like, let's build a thing that's a fake thing but feels like a real thing. Like you take House of Leaves, add in some Blair Witch Project, and then you've got you're cooking.
Yeah.
Cool
I still want to do something like that. And no, I mean it's great because it's almost like you take the impulse behind House of Leaves, which is play with the medium, play with what you can do with the tools of the medium, and try to create a feeling of unsettling horror and otherness. And it does that. It doesn't worry itself about like, oh, a house with infinite corridors. It's like, no, we're gonna take that idea and we're gonna say there's an entity, and it's creepy. Go.
Mm-hmm.
What can we do with this? What can we do with our 3 pillows and a suit,
Yeah.
and apparently quite a lot.
It reminds me of, did you ever read, it was a creepy pasta, I think, where the guy is like a caver and he's
God,
exploring caves and then finds that passageway that he's slowly opening up and posting pictures and stuff like that. Oh
stop.
man.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love that one.
That genuinely creeped me out reading. I remember, so my first job out of college was working for a public accounting firm, and I did not like my job, and I was you know, when you really hate your job, you find ways to not work at work because you don't
Uh-huh.
like it. And I remember there was one day where I just decided I am not going to do any more work, and I read the whole Caver thing in one sitting at my computer at work,
Uh-huh.
and it is the most, like, the weirdest experience of like sitting in a work desk surrounded by other people doing accounting and being absolutely terrified, like just being just absolutely scared. It's such a weird feeling.
Yeah.
It's cool, but it's so weird.
What's funny is I can't even remember what was so scary about Ted the Caver exactly.
It just was really effective in like the
Yeah.
mystery of it, and like the use of like the entries, and then there were videos, and it was just really good.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so we are officially locking this poll right now. Okay, calculating. And the book that we will be covering next month by one vote will be The Fisherman by John Langan. So that has officially won. So sorry, Star Wars, Heir to the Empire, which was a very close second. We'll have to save you for another day, but we will be uh, reading and discussing The Fisherman. So another month of horror, because I think that's another creepy book. So
Ooh,
um,
fun.
I love horror novels. So yeah.
Yeah.
So that will be next month. Let me check the calendar just to make sure, because next month is November, which is Thanksgiving for us Americans. So the last Friday of the month is the 24th, which is the day after Thanksgiving. So we're probably not going to have book club on the Friday after Thanksgiving. So I think we're going to say Friday, December 1st is the week after that. Will be the book club for The Fisherman. So we will put this in a post and everything. But for you folks listening right now, I just want to jot that down. Friday, December 1st, we will be meeting again to discuss The Fisherman. I've been wanting to read this one for a long time, so I'm pretty pumped about this.
Cool. I haven't heard of it, but I'm excited.
Yeah. All right, so that is going to do it for us this month. Once again, thank you to everyone that tuned in live for your patience with our technical issues to start things off. Hopefully, we'll have all this squared away next month, and it won't happen again. But no promises. What's a creepy thing with The Fisherman that could happen that is thematic? I don't know. We'll find out when we read it. If you are listening to this after the fact, if you're listening to the podcast version, please consider hanging out next month. It is really fun. We had a lot of chat today, which is always fun to see people kind of discussing the book and discussing what we're discussing and interacting with you guys. That's why we do it live. So please join us if you can.
Yeah. If you like what we do here at Doof Media and you want to see more of it, then please head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/doofmedia and consider donating to support our organization. At any available level, you'll get access to vote for the books that we talk about each month, as well as a bunch of other cool exclusive features. So go check it out.
Absolutely. If you have any questions or comments, or just want to reach out to us and let us know what you think about this book or any of these books, you can always do so. We're always monitoring these accounts. So you can find us on Twitter or X at Doof Media, or email us at doofmedia@gmail.com, or head over to the subreddit. That's r/Doof Media. I feel like Twitter changed to X, and there's this combination of people that just still call it Twitter and or left, or just like, I just feel like no one cares anymore, which is pretty remarkable.
It is funny. I still type in Twitter in the search bar, and it still shows Twitter on the search bar. So I don't know what to make of that.
Yeah, well, it's still twitter.com is what it goes to. It's just branded. It's just it's a weird move, but also it doesn't matter. So
It's pretty stupid.
we live in a wild time. Anyway, thank you all, and we'll see you next month for The Fisherman.
Mhm.